So I do have a meeting at 3, so I probably have to get off a couple minutes before then.
Okay. Well, I've got it set where we'll go until you let me know you got to go. And I've got some good decent questions lined up, and we'll just kind of answer those and wing it like we have before. Okay. So I think that is hopefully doing what it's supposed to be. Not really sure. Okay. So now I got to get back into here. Okay. Man, they should make it easier to just make it where it all connects already. Okay. All right, so it's allowing me to stream to apparently the Facebook one, but it won't allow me to add it to YouTube as well, it's looking like. So I don't understand that. I don't know how this stuff works. Okay, so I guess it says we're streaming live on Facebook, on YouTube. So I've got it on pause. So let me see if we're actually live. Nobody can see us right now. They can see okay, here we go. Yes. Okay, so we should be live right now. And I think we are only live on Facebook. So anybody who is trying to watch this from the YouTube channel, I do apologize, but I believe we are only live on Facebook. So I'm still learning how this works. So I'll do my best to get in YouTube and drop a line with a link to the Facebook page. But just wanted to welcome you to the show, Dr. Paul Offit. You're looking like you're half awake today. How are you doing?
Doing good. I was up early, but I'm awake. We're good.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely awake myself. I am looking forward to this. I've been getting blown up for literally weeks now. Getting woke up out of my sleep with messages. Have you seen this post? Did you see this? Oh my goodness, like you've got to see this. And I was like, what is going on? Why is everybody freaking out right now? And I realized that, you've been saying a lot of things that make a whole lot of sense to everybody. And so I really wanted to talk to you about this because, a lot of times we have this pro versus anti thing going on out here. And you and I think both of us are kind of over that pro versus anti. And we have, we met by me coming and sitting next to you at an ACIP meeting at the CDC. And that started a relationship, which has definitely blossomed into a friendship, which I'm sure us being friends is not only weird to most people, but it's an interesting thing. I'm sure you probably never expected to have a friend like me, but I'm honored to have you as a friend. So, well, thank you. I've definitely taken a lot of flack for it. So, I love you if I keep on keeping on. But, so I'm excited to have you on today. And I know I have a lot of people who have just been kind of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is Paul losing his mind? How are these the things he's saying? But I've been telling people this for a long time about you. You do believe in actual safety testing. You do believe in the safety of this. You're not just out here like, let's just throw it on the market and do whatever and see what happens. And, so I think you didn't shock me. I wasn't shocked by your post, but a lot of other people were. So I figured, maybe we could talk about some of this stuff. So is there anything about, I'm gonna ask you this before I ask you my questions, because I was curious, is there anything about this that you want to get out there that you have not been asked or not been able to get out there thus far when it comes to coronavirus and what's happening?
Well, so I think the questions I'm most asked by the media relate to the vaccine. So there's sort of the good news. The good news about a vaccine is that I think you can make one. In other words, the human coronaviruses, we've known about them since the 1960s. Every year, there's 4 strains of human coronavirus that circulate in the United States. Every year, about 15 to 20% of the children who come into our hospital with respiratory infections are infected with one of these strains of coronavirus. Studies done a couple decades ago show that if you inoculate people with one of these strains and then challenge them with a strain a year later, that they're protected against moderate to severe disease. That's good. That if natural infection doesn't protect against moderate to severe disease associated with reinfection, you're going to have a hard time making a vaccine because the best you can hope for is to mimic natural infection. at least mimic the immunity that's caused by natural infection. I mean, so for example, gonorrhea is a disease you can get again and again. That's a bad sign for a vaccine. Same with strep throats. You get strep throats again and again. That's why we don't have vaccines against Group A beta hemolytic strep or gonococcus. But here you can make a vaccine. So that's the first good piece of information. The second good piece of information is you know what your target protein is. The
Right.
virus has a spike. I mean, it sort of looks like a crown. That's where the word corona comes from. But then it has these spikes, and the spikes, that spike protein is the protein that allows you to attach to cells, allows the virus to attach to cells. So if you can prevent the spike protein from binding to cells, then you can prevent cell attachment, and then you can essentially prevent disease. The hard part is then making an antibody response against that protein. I mean, that's much more easily said than done. Now, we have two vaccines that do that. The hepatitis B vaccine and the human papillomavirus vaccine are both single protein vaccines that evoke neutralizing antibodies, protective neutralizing antibodies. But those vaccines were a little easier to make. I mean, they're so-called virus-like particles. So if you look at like the HPV vaccine under the electron microscope, it looks just like HPV, except obviously it doesn't contain the virus genome, so it can't reproduce itself. But that tells you that the protein that you're immunizing someone with is identical to the protein on the surface of the virus. So that's going to be the challenge for this vaccine, is making sure if you're going to have a single protein, because it's not going to be a virus-like particle, that you can introduce it in a manner that it looks virtually identical to the way it would look on the surface of the virus. That's going to be the challenge. Also, it's not easy. And the vaccine that's leading the pack is this mRNA vaccine, which just stands for messenger RNA. So you're inoculated with this messenger RNA, which actually fairly quickly disintegrates. So nobody really worries that it's safe, at least from that standpoint. I think that messenger RNA is translated to a protein. You then make an antibody response to the protein. You just want to make sure that you do a large efficacy trial before you put this on the market. I mean, and I imagine it would be given to healthcare workers who are on the front lines dealing with this, because they're the ones who are most frequently exposed and exposed to the largest quantity of virus because they're, in very close contact with their patients. So I think all I ask is that we have a large efficacy trial to prove that it works, and at least as far as you can tell, which is to say thousands and thousands of people, that you prove that it's safe, and then post-licensure that you monitor it closely to make sure that it's safe. Right.
I noticed that they've skipped a lot of stuff for this one. So this is something that's just seemed a little bit shocking for me, that it's so many things have been, I think, fast-tracked. So, I think a lot of the questions I have for you today will kind of get into that. So, I'm not going to say who asked the questions, because I feel like, you'll be able to tell, I think, if they're from friends or from doctors, so, and scientists and folks like that. So I guess we'll just kind of jump in here. So my first question is going to be, why is presumptive added to confirmed cases per CDC website? What exactly does presumptive mean in regards to the coronavirus test?
Right. So there was a study out of China that tried to answer the question, how good is the test? How good is this sort of nasopharyngeal swab, which then, and the test is a so-called PCR test, which just stands for polymerase chain reaction. And what it detects is it detects small fragments of the virus gene. So it doesn't really detect infectious virus. It doesn't really tell you whether or not you're contagious. And frankly, you can be PCR positive for a long period of time and not be contagious. I mean, I worked on rotavirus for 25 years, and that virus, you'll shed infectious virus for about 6 days. You can be PCR positive for 6 months. So it's a very specific test. If you're PCR positive, you have either currently infected or you've been recently infected with that virus. But it's when there was a study done out of China where what they did was they looked at very sick patients who were intubated. So, I mean, they had a tube, placed down into their windpipe. And then what the researchers did was they went and did the so-called bronchoalveolar lavage, which is to say, get fluid from very deep down in that trachea. And that was positive like 96% of the time. But when you then did a nasopharyngeal swab, it was positive about 65% of the time, which meant that about 1/3 of those, as many as 1/3, I think, of those cases where people are said to be negative may be positive. So I think what they mean by presumptive is they mean that in all likelihood, this is COVID-19, but we weren't able to isolate the virus. That's what I think presumptive means,
Okay.
because the test is imperfect.
Okay. Well, I've heard there's been a lot of false positives and things like that. So it does seem like it's hard for them to kind of come up with, you know, I guess, of actual factual number. And I've heard a lot of people saying that they think it's possible that this was kind of here before. Like I've heard a lot of people saying that they feel like this may have been here since before October. That a lot of people have been, you know, sick with something they haven't ever been sick with before. And it was just something similar to flu, but not like flu. And, you know, I've heard a lot of these kind of things, and that, you know, kind of China had kept it back before they released that this was happening. So maybe more people had gotten out and gotten into our country before we knew. So I don't know if any of that's true, but I know that there's so much, it seems so hard to come up with an actual number of not only infected, but also how many have passed from this. Because, you know, I've noticed, like, from the wording of like WHO and CDC and a lot of these places, it seems like the wording is, you know, there's not enough tests. So it's, you can assume, it's presumed or assumed that if the symptomology matches, then it can be listed as the cause of death. So it seems like we're going to get some flu-related deaths also listed under this year, or at least it would seem like it to me.
No, I think that if someone dies and they're said to have died of this COVID-19, I think they died of COVID-19. I mean, or at least they died while COVID-19 was being isolated from their nose or throat. I think that's true. I think you're certainly right that there's a lot of false negatives, meaning people who are said not to have it that had it. I think that's certainly true. In terms of when it came into the country, you know, China was not a good neighbor here, to say the least. I mean, you shouldn't have to have a whistleblower tell you that there was a novel virus that was killing people in Wuhan. You know, China should have immediately let the world know about that so people could prepare, but they didn't, and so some countries were slow to prepare. We were especially slow to prepare, sadly.
Right. Well, I think we're paying for it now. Okay, so here's my next one for you. It is said that Italy has doubled numbers for death, hospitalizations, or recovered. How can we actually trust the numbers put out by the WHO? Well, I guess we just kind of answered that question before I had to ask it. So there we go. All right. So considering the vaccine industry was built upon the premises of producing an antibody reaction to antigen stimulus, and also considering a baby cannot form antibodies until age 2, why would we inject an infant? And would this be a vaccine considered for children?
Well, so first of all, babies can make antibodies the minute they're born. Obviously, I mean, we give the hepatitis B vaccine within the first few days of life. One thing that is true, though, is babies are very good at making something called a T cell dependent B cell response. So B cells make antibodies, T cells help them make antibodies. There are some bacteria like Haemophilus influenza type B and meningococcus and pneumococcus, which have this complex sugar on the surface called polysaccharide. Children aren't good at making antibody responses to that. I mean, not until they're 2, and maybe that's what the questioner is thinking about. And so because it's a T cell independent B cell response. So babies are great at making T cell dependent B cell responses like the hepatitis B vaccine, but they're not good at making T cell independent B cell response. So when like the Hib vaccine first came was first available for children, it wasn't given to children less than 2 years of age, even though they clearly could suffer from this bacterial infection, because it just didn't work. Because until they took that complex sugar of Hib and linked it to a harmless protein and then gave it, then that converted a T cell independent response to a T cell dependent response, and then babies could respond to it. But God knows babies can make an antibody response when born. They would have to, because they are, you know, confronted with a lot of challenges from the environment.
Like right off the bat, right?
Off the bat.
Come right out of the womb into the crazy. All right. So let's see here. We've got the specific immune response, which has been taught for generations, speaks of a very specific antibody, which is only specific to one precise antigen. If this indeed is true, how could an antibody formed in response to attenuated, fragmented, or partial viral DNA ever be useful to feed off the type of DNA which presents with natural viral exposure? Does not the B cell have to form an entirely new antibody in this instance? Is it not possible that the vaccine industry could be taking credit for a B cell, what a B cell has been doing all along?
I'm a little confused by that question, but
Yeah, I was confused by it too, but I was going to ask it anyway because I was asked to, and I wasn't sure if you'd understand it better than I did. So you never know.
So there is not a DNA vaccine. I mean, that doesn't, nor is there an mRNA vaccine. We don't have those vaccines yet. There's not a platform for that. If you gave a DNA vaccine, the way that works is the DNA then gets transcribed to messenger RNA. The messenger RNA then is translated to a protein. And the protein, even just a single protein like the hepatitis B vaccine or the human papillomavirus vaccine, those are single protein vaccines. I mean, hepatitis B is just that one protein, hepatitis B surface antigen. Human papillomavirus is now 9 of the proteins, but it's all the same protein, just from 9 different serotypes, the so-called L1 protein.
Right.
Each protein actually has a variety of epitopes, or to say immunologically distinct regions to which you make an antibody. And you just want to make sure that you make neutralizing antibodies that can neutralize the virus. And that I think is going to be the challenge for COVID-19. I mean, the purified the protein approach, whether it's an mRNA that makes the protein or the DNA that makes the protein or just giving the protein itself, you need to make sure that you don't just make binding antibodies, but you also make neutralizing antibodies. That's going to be the key. And that's why you have to do an efficacy trial to see whether or not it works. Because I think you usually have 2 choices. If you don't know the amount or type of antibody that's going to protect you, then you have to do an efficacy trial. I mean, or said another way, you need an immunological correlate for protection. I mean, the rotavirus vaccine, which I was fortunate enough to work on, as well as many vaccines, actually don't have an immunological correlate. That's why you have to do an efficacy trial. Here, you don't have an immunological correlate, so you have to do an efficacy trial. For the meningococcal vaccine, there's only a few hundred people in the United States who get meningococcus, so you can't really do an efficacy trial. You'd have to vaccinate, hundreds of people. So therefore, you need an immunological correlate, which you have for the meningococcal vaccine. So those are your 2 options. You either have to have a clear correlate, or you have to do an efficacy trial. We don't have a correlate of immunity for this vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine yet, so we have to do an efficacy trial, and it has to be big.
Well, I think that we need that I think we need that for a lot of older ones too, to be honest with you, after some of the stuff I've researched, but we get into that usually on our own. Okay, so this question is one from one of our doctor friends, and I'm just this one I sent you some links to so you could kind of get ready for it, but Dr. Gala asked you about the DoD paper, but you are not aware of it at the time. Does our mass flu vaccine program cause people to be more vulnerable to coronavirus? According to a peer-reviewed paper published January 2020, influenza vaccinations was associated with a 30% increased risk of coronavirus.
Yeah, so there's 2 issues when you're infected with a virus, or in theory, given especially a live attenuated viral vaccine. And one is vaccine interference, and the other is vaccine enhancement. So vaccine interference, which is where the word interferon comes from, actually, it's sort of interfering particle. If you're infected with a virus, the cells then of your body, the immune cells, can make these proteins called interferon, which can then interfere with other viruses' ability to infect cells. Then there's vaccine enhancement, which is to say you're infected with you're inoculated with a vaccine, and then you're exposed to, say, wild type natural virus. And the vaccine, instead of decreasing your chance of being infected, actually enhances your chance of being infected, which is the worst possible thing. So I think that the study that they were referring to, which I looked at, I mean, the general hypothesis of that study was, does the influenza vaccine, which remember is not a whole virus, it's just, in fact, it's not even a killed virus, it's just essentially, it's hemagglutinin and neuraminidase from the virus. So it's not whole killed virus, it's just those 2 proteins are sort of enhanced in that product. Does that cause really vaccine enhancement? That's really what they're asking. Does it cause virus enhancement where you're worse off having gotten this vaccine and then you're exposed to something like coronavirus or metapneumovirus? The hypothesis that they raised was, is always the null hypothesis. It doesn't, and they couldn't reject that null hypothesis. I mean, so what they did was they substratified it and showed that when you looked at smaller numbers, in some cases it protected you against the infection, and in some cases, like in corona, it didn't. I think that's the problem with taking small sort of data from a larger database. I just think you can be misled. And I think that's what that paper was. So for example, with the vaccine, the Heplisav B vaccine, which is this adjuvanted vaccine that's now licensed for people over 18. That vaccine was shown to show in a statistically significant manner to increase your risk of heart attacks. It's true. And so as a consequence of that, now there's post-licensure studies looking to make sure that if that's true, that we know that, and we'll see what happens. But it also, in that pre-licensure trial, showed that it statistically significantly decreased your incidence of prostate cancer. I think neither of those things is true. I don't think the vaccine protects against prostate cancer, and I don't think it causes heart attacks. But we'll see what happens. And see, that's the problem with small numbers from large databases. That can be misleading. Or let me say it another way. If you flip a coin, if I flip a coin 5 times, the chances that it comes up heads 5 times in a row is greater than 20 to 1. It's 32 to 1, which is statistically significant. It's unlikely that's going to happen. I could sit here for a long time, and you and I would not see that happen. But if I flip it 70,000 times, you're likely to find a run of 5 heads in a row. I mean, technically, you've just proven it's a 2-headed coin, even though it's not. So I think that's the problem with small numbers from large databases.
Right. Yeah, I remember that one. That was February 2018, Heplisav B. I remember that because I think that was the most I've ever had my mind blown in the CDC was when the lady said, they asked, has this been given, is this being given in other countries? No. Is this adjuvant been tested with other adjuvants? No. And I said, well, do we give this with other vaccines? And she said, well, it's just assumed that we give it on the same day, just in a different limb. And I lost it. Like I know I'm not a doctor, Paul, but I know that this arm is connected to this body the same way this arm is connected to this body, and it's all one big system. So that seemed a very kind of crazy statement from someone in the CDC.
I thought it was not us at our best. I certainly agree with that. It was yeah. I think a lot of people cringed on that statement.
Yeah, that one made me, I cried a little bit on that one. I was just like, what just happened? Did I really just witness that? Like, I need to go to school to be a doctor so I can come work here and teach these people a few things. I feel horrible for saying that, but sometimes, it's like, I don't like knowing that I know more about my human body than the person in the CDC panel on the other side of the room sometimes. That's not a good thing. Oh my goodness. I did want to tell you, we're getting a lot of people in the stream who just wanted me to thank you for being on today with me. So I just want to go ahead and toss that out there. I do appreciate it. And I appreciate it. I know a lot of people have, they kind of find our dynamic very interesting. So this is kind of fun for other people too, I think. So, and I think we actually have a lot of your people watching today too. So I thought that was kind of fun. So hello to all of you. So we're going to keep on going here. Let's see. Do you, like many medical professionals in the community, feel that this has been going around untested for a couple of months? Okay. See, a lot of these questions are questions I had too, so I guess they're just kind of overlapping a little bit, but we kind of already covered that.
Well, it's a reasonable question. You don't know. I mean, because China was not a good actor here, and so we knew that they had a problem in December. So the question is reasonable. Could this have been before that? Sure. Is it possible people could have come into this country and there was community spread before that? It's possible. I think the way we're going to know this, I think, is when it's not by doing the PCR testing. It's when we finally do so-called serological testing, because that's the best way to figure this out. I mean, if you've been infected, you may be PCR negative, even though you were infected a while ago. You may be PCR negative, even though you're currently infected, because it's not a perfect test. But serology is a great test. It's not subject to sampling error. People who are asymptomatically infected will still have an immune response. Interestingly, the immune response takes a little longer to develop than I would have guessed. I mean, you don't really start to see antibodies till around 7 to 10 days later. Usually you see one particular kind of antibody, so-called immunoglobulin M, around 3 or 4 days, but that doesn't happen here. It comes up later, but it clearly peaks up at around 10, 14 days. So I'll give you an example. Like when swine flu came into this country in 2009, and killed about 12,000 people. The original estimates for mortality was about 4%, that 4 of every 100 people who got swine flu died from it. That was the original estimate. Then they did serological studies and found that there was this huge area under the tip of the iceberg with people who were infected, but either didn't know it or had very mild symptoms. And when that study was done and we saw really how many people were infected, the mortality rate wasn't 4%. It was less than 0.01%. It was that There's that much asymptomatic disease. And I think that'll be true here too. I mean, when we really do big seroepidemiological studies and see really how many people were infected, well, we're going to be, I think, surprised. Because now when they say there's like 200,000 infections or 300,000 infections, I think that could be up by a factor of 10.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to tell you also, sorry, this just popped up in the thread, but we had somebody say we need more dialogue and more open minds from both sides. Paul and I agree. This is why we're doing this. This is why we talk to each other. Well, it's not the only reason, but I mean, that is what started this, was me hoping that we could find a way to bridge the gap, or whatever you want to call it, and find a way to treat each other like people. Because all of us, it was just like, doctors are monsters. We hate all of you. You hate all of us. We're statistics and numbers, and you guys are monsters. That's what I saw for years in this movement. And it broke my heart, because it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I don't know. I'm a religious person. You know that about me. And my Bible tells me that I'm supposed to love everybody, and that, God makes it rain on the just and the unjust, whoever those people are. We're all the same in the eyes of God. And so for me, I don't see you any different than I do anybody else. I understand we differ on some things, but who doesn't? This is the part where it's so hard for me to wrap my head around. Who doesn't? None of us agree with everybody on everything, but we don't hate them because we have difference of opinions for other issues. So this is where we have to start looking at this. If Paul and I can make a friendship, I believe anybody on this planet can make a friendship. So take this as a good example, you guys, to stop treating each other so mean and so badly, and spending your time arguing, and try to actually have a rapport so we can get somewhere. Because these kind of conversations is what should be happening. To hear you talk about how them just throwing this in a human trial could actually be a big deal, and it could be an issue. Thank you. Thank you. Because coming from someone who's been fighting for the safety of this for so long, to have someone like you stand up and say, wait a minute, we're not doing this right. We're not doing this right. This is not the process. Something's being skipped here. That means a lot to people like me who are fighting for that safety. So I really do appreciate you doing what you're doing, because it is not easy. I know it's not. I've seen the flack you've been taking. It feels a lot like the flack that I take all the time. So I get it. And I mean, it takes balls to do what you're doing. It really does. And I said that to you. And my comment got deleted, but I did actually say, I really do think what you're doing, and to speak up about this, especially with the friends you have in the public health community, those kind of things, it does take a lot of cojones to say what you're saying. So you were greatly appreciated for being honest and being truthful, because you didn't have to say anything. You could have just kept your mouth shut and sat at home like everybody else. So I'm very proud of you for what you've been doing the last few weeks. I'm super proud of you. So I want to thank you for that real quick before we even jump ahead. Anybody who don't like that, I love y'all too, dang it. So let's see. So, what do you think about high dose vitamin C for this? I've heard that there's been a lot of, that it seems to be actually working to help with this. What is your opinion on that?
Well, again, I think if it's all studyable. So they should study it. I mean, usually if you look at sort of high dose intravenous vitamin C, the papers that have been published all pretty much relate to sepsis, meaning invasive bacterial infection. And there are people, when they're infected with COVID-19 and they have this so-called, cytokine storm, where they have their lungs white out and they're severely ill. I mean, we know that is associated with the massive production of a protein called interleukin 6. That's true. We also know that there's a monoclonal antibody directed against interleukin 6 called tocilizumab. So I think that works. I mean, I don't even think you need to test that. If you find that somebody is that sick, has these high levels of interleukin 6, give them tocilizumab. In terms of vitamin C, I think the studies that have been done on sepsis, a couple of them have showed the good ones. I mean, the prospective, placebo-controlled, people are blinded as to who got what. I mean, right. It doesn't seem to show any difference. I think, if my feeling about alternative medicine is there's no such thing. I mean, if an alternative medicine works, it's medicine. If it doesn't work, it's not an alternative. It's just a matter of doing the right studies. And I feel this way about hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, or which is the hydroxychloroquine is an anti-malarial drug. Right. Azithromycin is an antibiotic. When Donald Trump gets onto the stage and says, I think that this is going to be the greatest breakthrough in the history of medicine, I think he overstates that, because sometimes he's given the overstatement. I don't know if you've noticed that, but
just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But, just test it. That's all I'm saying. Test it, because it sort of bugs me a little bit when doctors just give it I mean, when somebody's sick, there's this notion that you can't hurt them. They're sort of going downhill. Let's just do anything because we can. It's not true. You can hurt them. I mean, when people are sick, one of three things can happen. They can get better, they can stay the same, or they can do worse. You don't want to take people who are going to stay the same or do better and make them worse. And that's why you have to do studies to prove that something is effective before you test. And I feel the same way about the antivirals, which have names like remdesivir, flavipyravir. Test them first, test them, and make sure they work before you give them to people. Make sure they're safe before you give them to people. Everything that has a positive effect has a negative effect. Everything, vaccines too. And that's why you need to, in fact, if it doesn't have a negative effect, then it probably doesn't have a positive effect. And same thing with vitamin C. I mean, anything that has a positive effect can have a negative effect. And vitamin C, in high doses can cause kidney stones. And there's there's always downsides.
Yeah, I've heard, and this is just kind of popped in my head when you were saying that, but I've actually heard high doses of vitamin C can be in some ways dangerous to children with severe autism. And I've done, trying to figure out how that would be and, doing all kinds of reading into that, but it seems like it causes same kind of things, almost like deposits to build up in their body and stuff and cause them issues like that. So, because when I first started really kind of trying to jump into, okay, it's time to be super healthy. We're done with GMOs, we're done with all this kind of stuff. It's time to live right. That was one of the things that I kind of, looked into, and it's just like, I don't know about this. All right, let's see here. Okay. So what are your thoughts on vaccine-derived virus interference associating with coronavirus and human metapneumovirus? I hope I'm saying that right. Metapneumovirus?
Metapneumovirus, yeah, pretty close. But so we talked about that a little bit before. That was also part of that paper regarding viral interference and substratifying. So I think we've addressed that one.
Okay. Just making sure.
Metapneumovirus is not an easy word to say. I agree.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay. If the coronavirus is constantly mutating, how can they make a vaccine for it? And would it have to be altered yearly like the flu shot?
Yeah, I don't think it's constantly mutating. There are two circulating strains, apparently, the so-called L and S strains, but it looks like that they're the same serotype. That's good. And it doesn't look like it is mutating. I mean, it's a bat virus. It's a bat coronavirus. It's 96% bat coronavirus that also has a gene that's from pangolins, which are these like small mammalian anteater things. And that's what enabled it to come into the human population. I mean, it is remarkable, actually. I mean, this is our third novel coronavirus, and it is very different than the first two. I mean, SARS caused about 8,000 cases and 800 deaths. MERS caused about 2,500 cases and 1,000 deaths, but they were 1 year phenomenon. That's not this virus. There's something unique about that pangolin gene that really caused it to spread in the human population. But I take heart in the fact that this epidemic can be stopped. I mean, China has stopped it. So has South Korea and Singapore and Japan have largely stopped. You can stop it. And I am sure there are hundreds of millions of people in those countries that are still susceptible to this virus.
Right.
Yet it's not spreading. But you have to take this shelter in place thing seriously, and some people aren't. And I think that's a mistake. Take it seriously because we can stop it. We have to stop it because here's what worries me the most, actually. It's we are now sort of crushing our economy. I mean, you have, 10 million people who are on unemployment insurance. The estimates are that 20% of the American workforce could lose its jobs. I mean, that's 35 million people. I mean, think about the health care, the public health disaster that comes with that. I mean, with joblessness, because a lot of these businesses are going to fold. They can't stay shut this long. With joblessness comes homelessness, especially among the poor. These are the people who are most likely to be hurt. With homelessness comes food insecurity, addiction, domestic abuse, child abuse.
Right.
You know how many people, depression, suicide. You know how many children who are like abused in foster home situations and are now waiting their time in court and are now vulnerable because they can't get to court. I mean, that's just one of the many examples of domestic abuse cases that now sit because we can't get to the courts. This is a nightmare, and I think it's going to be years to dig out from the harm that's caused by this. I mean, the first wave is obviously people suffering and being hospitalized and dying from COVID. The second wave is what is going to happen out there now with this massive amount of joblessness that's about to happen.
Yes.
That too is a public health disaster.
Yes.
That's why we need to to have a reasonable goal. And the goal is not to end all cases and deaths from COVID. That's not going to happen initially. There is still going to be cases and deaths, but we're just trying to get to the point where we don't overwhelm the healthcare system. You know what's interesting, one quick small point, is if you look at the total number of deaths in the United States over the past 3 weeks, it's gone from 55,000 deaths a week to 45,000 deaths a week. We have 10,000 fewer deaths per week in this country than we did before this outbreak, because one, people aren't driving, so they're not dying in car accidents, and the homicide rate has also come way down. So, I mean, sort of, but again, we're going to have to get out of get out of our houses and get back in the world, and we just want to make sure that the healthcare system can handle this, so that not just handle these patients, but handle all the other patients that need intensive healthcare.
Yeah,
that's the worry.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was thinking about that when it comes to, like, for me, me, my life, my story. I got $1.96 left in the bank right now. I'm a stay-at-home mom with 2 little girls who have special needs, and my home-based business, nobody's buying. I mean, of course, everyone's afraid. No one knows where their next penny's coming from. So, I mean, this is just going to get worse and worse. They're sitting here telling you don't have to pay your power right now, but that's going to all add up. You don't have to pay your rent on time right now, but that's just going to add up. By the time they say you can come out of hiding, we're all going to be in the hole so far. I don't know how we get back out.
I completely agree. And that has to be part of this. What I don't like is when people just declare a date, like the governor of Virginia said, June 10th. Can't we have some rules? I mean, can't we say that, once, I like Angela Merkel, who has said, once the doubling time is 10 days, meaning, that it's 10 days from, let's say if you have 1,000 deaths, it's 10 days till you have 2,000 deaths. Once you know that's true, that the doubling time is 10 days or longer, then you can assume that hospital discharges will be greater than hospital admissions. And then you can go back to work with an understanding there's still going to be cases, and there may be a bump up. You're just trying not to overwhelm the healthcare system, but people have got to, at some point, get back to work. This is another tragedy in the making.
Yeah, I think the depression rates are going to go up because I'm already depressed and I'm a happy person. Anybody who knows me knows I'm usually smiling. And I mean, this is making me super sad because I mean, with two little girls, they're 4 and 6 years old, I mean, this is hard. I got a 20-year-old I'm still supporting too, like this is hard when you're by yourself out here. And all of a sudden, all the people that you usually would look to when you need help, y'all know I don't have family, so my friends are my family. All those people I would usually look to, they're hurting just as bad as you are. So nobody's got anybody right now. I mean, it is a scary time.
It would be, I think when we do the serum studies and we say, okay, here's someone who has a high level of antibodies against this virus, who has been infected by this virus and now survived, they're immune. Probably not for a long time, but they're certainly going to be immune for a few years. And then what would be nice is to have a force of people who are immune to do things like go to nursing homes. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's in her mid-80s. She's in a nursing home in northern New Jersey. And, she said, they don't let us eat breakfast together or lunch together or dinner together anymore. They just sort of put the meals under the door and we're not allowed any visitors. She said she feels like she's in prison. She's in her mid-80s and she's basically in a prison. And, it'd be nice to have somebody come and talk to her.
Right.
And the same thing I was at the grocery store about a week ago, and there was a woman, I would say maybe in her early 70s, who was shaking. And I said, I thought she was sick. I asked her if she was okay. And she said she was she was living alone. She didn't have anybody who could shop for her. And, she was that scared to come to the grocery store. She thought she was going to the grocery store to die. And it would be nice to have a group of people, an army of immune people, not only to help her, but that's the people you want in the front lines in the healthcare. It's people who we know are immune because the virus doesn't mutate. It doesn't appear to mutate. Hopefully it mutate, but it doesn't appear to.
Yeah, you are correct. I completely agree. I had to go to the grocery store, I guess last weekend, and it was scary. It was mostly seniors. And I mean, it was early. It was mostly seniors. Most people were wearing the facial mask or the latex gloves or whatever. And I mean, the way they look at me being in there, like, do not come near me. If you come down the aisle, they're like beelining the other way. And I'm like, I'm good, y'all. I'm not sick. It's cool. Like, and I felt bad for even being in there because I thought, well, they're looking at me like I'm a threat, And so, I mean, it made me feel bad, but to see, like, I wanted to ask you this too, because a lot of people have asked me this, and I know you probably would know this better than I would. What face mask actually helped this, Paul? What face mask actually works? It would seem like a cloth would not really get the job done when this stuff can live on cloth. So do you mind kind of telling everybody what, if they want to wear one, what to wear?
Well, so in the hospital, when we walk into a room, say of somebody who has tuberculosis and is coughing, we don't wear these little rectangular surgical face
Right.
we wear something called an N95 respirator. Usually you're fitted for that. And it has a tight seal around your nose and mouth so that you know that when you're breathing, you're not breathing small droplets from this person who has
Right.
tuberculosis, especially when it's extremely drug resistant tuberculosis. I mean, that's a dangerous thing. So that's what we wear. When you wear the surgical face mask, I mean, there are a couple problems with that. First of all, you can breathe in and out of the side of it, you see.
That's
Secondly,
right.
you know, if you wear it for a long period of time, it can get wet and then it becomes a little more porous. So it's something. I mean, it is something. I think where it can be dangerous is if people think, well, I have a mild respiratory infection, I'll wear this to make sure that nobody else will get sick.
Right.
Bad idea. It's a false sense of security. I find it actually surprising that the CDC now said that they are moving to recommending that everybody walk outside with a face mask on. I think that's fine, except for the fact that where are we getting them from? I mean, right now, hospital workers aren't getting these.
That's right.
So are we about to get this huge shipment of face masks that's going to cover everybody? I hope that's true.
That would be nice. Well, lucky for me, Paul, I make soap at home. So I've got a giant, like, wrap around your head respirator face mask. So if things really hit the fan, I might look like an alien out here or like I'm a part of a hazmat crew, but I'm ready. Oh my goodness. Okay. So let's see here. So this is a question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it or not, but I'll ask it anyway because I was asked to. This one came to you from a police detective. When these COVID-19 deaths are investigated, are they documenting whether the patient had received a flu vaccine or a Tamiflu as a treatment prior to their death? If yeah, it says why or why not.
I don't know. I mean, I would assume so. I mean, it's all part of
Yeah.
the medical history. When someone comes into the hospital, their immunization history and medicine history is all part of the history. So you would hope so.
Okay. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this either, but I'll ask you because I was asked to. Would the COVID vaccine be a part of the vaccine injury compensation program or possibly added to the children's vaccine schedule?
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Here's what I would say, because that's a sort of a few steps ahead of where we are now. I don't, when Dr. Fauci says he thinks this could be done as early as 12 to 18 months, that's really optimistic. I mean, let's assume the mRNA vaccine is the vaccine. I mean, it's Moderna's vaccine now. We know they're in human trials in Washington State. But this is just the beginning. I mean, that first human trial was a 45-person trial that there was 3 groups of 15 each, where they're just doing a dose ranging study. I mean, they're trying to figure out which dose is right, you know. And so you start with the low end, then you go to the middle dose, then you go to the higher dose, and then you look in the serum to see whether or not there's antibodies. And that gives you some sense of, but that doesn't prove that's the right dose. I mean, to do the right dose ranging study for our rotavirus vaccine, that was like a 12,000 child study, you know, with several different doses to make sure that you're not giving too much, you know, which would be a safety issue, or too little, which would be an efficacy issue. You want to make sure you're giving just the right dose. Then you want to make sure that you have a trial that's big enough that represents the entire American population. You know, that African Americans are represented, all different genetic and ethnic, et cetera, backgrounds are represented. Right. So you can then, with some degree of confidence, feel you can move forward, you know, with the recommendation. But I think if it's the mRNA vaccine, which you don't hear about, is that in order to, although you can mass produce that very quickly, what hasn't been mass produced yet, near as I know, is the complex lipid delivery system in which that mRNA would exist. I don't think that's been scaled up yet. I think it would take at least a year to fill this vaccine. I think it would take, just to scale up that particular lipid delivery system, would take at least a year, and to do the efficacy studies would take at least a year. I mean, I can't imagine we would have something within 2 years. And then the question becomes, where is COVID-19 2 years from now?
Right.
I mean, is it like SARS and MERS, which basically went away after a year? Does it come back next year, but very mildly, and so it's not as big of an issue? So I think that the answer to that question will be much more intelligent when we see where we are when there is a vaccine.
I'm scared because I feel like we just set a precedent in this country for when a new germ comes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, we don't react this way. We didn't react this way to Zika, MERS, SARS, Ebola, I mean, influenza, any of it. Our country's never reacted like this in the time frame that I've been alive. And this seems very like, it feels, maybe it's just because I'm one of those people who hates the, the system, but it feels very overreach, and it feels very, I mean, like, I understand we have an at-risk population. I do understand that, but I feel there are ways to protect that population where the rest of the world here can get back to life as usual. Because these, like, I feel like, we've got a lot of these bigger corporations who are going to survive, but all these mom and pop places, they were already petering out before. They're going to be gone. I mean, I don't see how a lot of these places are going to survive, and it's going to be all these big corporations is all it's going to be left.
Yeah, one thing you brought up, it's a good point, is that when the Ebola outbreak hit in West Africa, and people were dying in droves, there was a vaccine that was virtually immediately available. And people thought, hey, that can't be very hard. But what I think people didn't realize is that vaccine had been tested for 20 years. There was extensive animal model testing. There was extensive phase 1 and phase 2 testing. You had great immunogenicity and safety data in a lot of people. And that vaccine was just ready for a phase 3 efficacy trial. So when that outbreak happened, that vaccine was in vials and ready to go. And I think that people were confused by that, thinking that, it could be ready so quickly. This, you're starting at ground zero. I mean, there is no coronavirus vaccine. There is no messenger RNA vaccine that is currently on the schedule. I mean, this is a purified protein vaccine, true, but it's a single protein vaccine, and we have other protein vaccines, but this isn't really analogous to those other 2 protein vaccines. So do extensive testing of this vaccine before you put it out there into millions of people, because I think there now is this kind of break the glass mentality of full speed ahead, cut the corners you need to cut. And I really, really, really hope we don't do that, because especially for a vaccine that you may be giving to tens of millions of people or more.
Yeah, it seems very scary and very dangerous to me. And I mean, we know that no matter how many years they're tested, there's still potential for injury. But when you skip all the testing and you just jump straight into giving it to human beings in human trials, we are definitely the guinea pigs in that trial for sure. Yes, and I get, the only thing I agree with, Paul, is that they signed up to be a part of it. I know that that's not logical for a lot of these, because you've explained this to me in the past, because I've said that, like, the CDC says safe and effective, get them. But what people don't realize is we are that post-market data. You have to be, a lot of us have to be getting them before y'all get the information you need to see what kind of damage it's actually causing.
Well, but again, that's why you do as big of a pre-licensure efficacy trial as you can. But you're right. I mean, what that tells you is, with a certain degree of comfort, that you have what appears to be a safe and effective vaccine. But you never really know that until it's put into millions of people. That's absolutely true. And that's why you look when you do post-marketing surveillance on that. But on the one hand, you have clearly a virus that can kill people and can cause a lot of suffering. True. And so it creates this tension, because people are so terrified by this. I just really hope we do a large efficacy trial to prove that this is safe, this work, to the extent that we can before we put it out there. I really hope we do that. And I think we will.
Yeah. So this is like seeing China, all the reporting that came from China, everybody just dropping face down in the streets and things like that. Why are we not seeing that anywhere else with this? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Most of the stuff that was,
say that again?
Most of the news that was coming out of China was them showing video of grown men and people just dropping face down dead in the streets from this. We're not seeing that coming from anywhere else. So was that like amped up for media, or do you think that that's something that's actually happening from this? Because we're not seeing that anywhere else. I
don't know. I mean, they certainly were building a lot of hospitals. They had to create a lot of intensive care units that didn't exist. So clearly they weren't able to meet the initial healthcare emergency. Right. I think it's true in Italy. I think the reason Italy's having a problem, or having the degree of problem they have, is it's really more of a Northern Italy phenomenon, more around Milan than Rome. And I think that part of that is that Northern Italy is there's a lot of rural communities there. I don't think they had the intensive care set up there that they needed to have for this kind of event. I think a lot of people were dying in Italy that may not have died were there better intensive care unit facilities.
Okay, well, let's see here. So can you imagine a scenario where SARS-CoV-2 vaccine is mandated nationwide? Is this a possibility? And if it was, is this something you would support?
Again, I think we're 2 years away from this, and then I think that would be, it just depends where we are. It depends on the nature of the epidemic. I don't the notion that you could get herd immunity from the disease itself, I think it's probably wrong. In other words, there'll always be a group of susceptibles. I mean, for example, when I was a little boy, I had measles. I had measles, as did, I was a child of the 50s, I had measles, as did 2 to 3 million people every year. And even though that measles that I got gave me lifelong immunity, still every year, 2 to 3 million people got measles and 48,000 people were hospitalized and 500 were killed. So, and all those adults, all those people who got it as a child and grew up were protected for the rest of their lives. Still, there was always enough susceptibles to cause 2 to 3 million cases a year. The only way we could eliminate measles was a measles vaccine. And we did eliminate measles with, by the year 2000. So that's the best way to create herd immunity. Do I think it would ever be mandated? I guess we'll see what happens over the next few years. I'd be surprised, actually, if this virus had the kind of staying power that people fear. I think
I agree.
it's going to be a little more like SARS and MERS. Although I think it will be back, it may be back. First, the key thing is what's going to happen this summer. I mean, is it going to act like human coronaviruses, which basically are winter spring diseases, because it is droplet spread. When it gets more humid out, those droplets start to take on water and fall more quickly, so you're less contagious. That's going to be the thing. In Greece, this is not a big deal. That's good, and it may be because it's more humid, but then there are places in the southern hemisphere that are suffering this that are also humid, and they're seeing it. It's a bat virus. It's not a human virus. It's a bat virus that's come into the human population. So I don't think we quite know how it's going to act. I sure hope it abates as we get into the summer. That would be great.
Yeah, I know that hopefully the heat will help for sure. I've seen a lot of playgrounds wrapped in caution tape lately, and it just breaks my heart to see that. We're right at this season where it's spring and it's time to come out and enjoy the flowers and everything blooming. And instead we're all stuck in our houses. So it's a little depressing. I mean, it kind of adds to the depression of it. We just went through all the winter and it's finally getting warm, and well, maybe not where you are right now, but where I am, it's getting warm. All right, let's see here. So these next few questions are a little bit harder than the other ones. I don't think you'll have a hard time with them. 2:50.
I have in about 3 minutes. I'm going to have to get on this conference call with the governor's office. Not that that's more important than you. You're more important than the governor's office. Don't get me.
All right. Well, I'll ask as quick as I can. You may only make it through one of these then. Given the experience with the first SARS vaccine 10 years ago, and with the initial response to the dengue vaccine or the RSV vaccine, in which participants, mice for SARS and people for dengue and RSV, produced antibodies, but then were more likely to overreact to the virus after exposure, is it appropriate to use antibodies as a measure of the new vaccine's success? What if the vaccine produces antibodies, but those antibodies make an individual more susceptible to overreacting to the virus when they are exposed, increasing risk of serious disease or death?
Right. That's a very good question. It's an excellent question. And it's a fair question for what's going on now. I mean, the reason the dengue vaccine, I think, caused a problem was that the way that vaccine was made is it was the yellow fever vaccine into which was inserted the pre-envelope and envelope region for dengue serotype 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's how it was. But it wasn't dengue virus. It was yellow fever vaccine that had a dengue virus protein. So the question was that protein then presented to the immune system in the same way that it would be if it was dengue virus, right? Because dengue virus is usually, that protein is usually on a whole dengue virus, not on a yellow fever vaccine.
Right.
So, and I think the answer to that is that probably was the problem, because there's a new dengue vaccine that has an attenuated dengue type 2 into which now the 1, 3, and 4 are inserted. And that doesn't seem to be the problem. I mean, that's been tested now in children who are seronegative, who were then exposed to, naturally exposed to the virus. And that doesn't seem to be a problem. Great. But this protein, what you want to make sure is that when you give this protein, whether it's an mRNA vaccine or a DNA vaccine or purified protein vaccine, that what it's inducing is high levels of neutralizing antibodies, but not binding antibodies. In other words, you want the virus to be neutralized by those antibodies, because the question is right. If the quantity of binding antibodies is either greater or longer lived than the quantity of neutralizing antibodies, then you do possibly run the risk of something called antibody-dependent enhancement, because then the antibody binds to the virus, but it doesn't neutralize it. Then what happens is that antibody actually serves as an anchor to be taken up by cells through the so-called Fc receptor. It's a very good question. And I think it's something that I'm sure is being looked at, because it's an issue whenever you give something apart from the natural way the virus, the protein would be seen. See, with hepatitis B vaccine and HPV vaccine, which were also purified protein vaccines, those were virus-like particles. I mean, if you look at the HPV vaccine under the electron microscope, it looks like HPV. I mean, that was a conformationally accurate presentation of that protein. It was true to the virus. And
Right.
so this isn't a virus-like particle. So you really, really want to make sure you're getting neutralizing and not binding antibodies. That's a great question. Thank you, but I do have to go to this meeting now.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I might send you the rest of them and you can answer me when you can, and I'll share them with my people. I love you, Paul. You know that. Thank you so much for joining me today, and have fun with the governor.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye.